We are live now, doctor.
Good evening, friends. A hearty and warm welcome to this webinar titled Newer IOL Formulas for Perfect Refractive Outcomes. This webinar is being organized by Chakrabarti Eye Care Center under the aegis of Kerala Society of Ophthalmic Surgeons and Trivandrum Ophthalmic Club. And we have a very vibrant and very dynamic panel today. Before I go to that, I am Arup Chakrabarti from Chakrabarti Eye Care Center. I incidentally also happen to be president of the Kerala Society of Ophthalmic Surgeons and editor proceedings of AIOS. I would like to thank KSOS as well as Trivandrum Ophthalmic Club for letting us use the banner, official banner of KSOS and TOC. And our star speaker today is Dr. Tun Kwan Yeo from Singapore. More about it a little while from now. And we have a very dynamic group of panelists today. These people are extremely dedicated and committed ophthalmologists. They have a scientific bent of mind, and they believe in evidence-based medicine practice. Their hallmark for all three of them are they're very passionate teachers. And they ride the wave of cutting-edge technology, whether most of them are real or sometimes virtual, because they're all very well informed and very knowledgeable. And they have an abiding interest in intraocular lens power calculation. Ramesh Dorai happens to be from Chennai Sundar Eye Clinic, a good friend of mine for over 30 years. And he has in-depth knowledge of almost all topics in ophthalmology. Welcome to you, Ramesh. Then we have Dr. Chandrasekhar Vavikar from Thane, who has Vavikar Eye Institute. I first met him, I remember, way back in 2004, got to know him, his academic side, in an ASCRS meeting where we both of us were attending a Dave Dillman session, an instruction course on phaco-dynamics. And since then, Chandrasekhar has his graph has gone up. He's a high volume surgeon. He talks a lot on the newer technology that comes in cataract and refractive surgery. Welcome to you, Chandrasekhar. And then we have our young panelist, Dr. Nirupama Baliga. She has a very mature head on her young shoulders. She heads the ophthalmology department in one of the premier institutes in the country. And she has, though she has a primary fellowship in pediatric ophthalmology, she takes abiding interest in intraocular lens power and has a lot of publications. And then I just want to tell you that today all of us know that cataract surgery is a refractive procedure, and intraocular lens formulas play a very important role. Please don't worry, I'm not going to describe this slide. This is just to tell you that this is the generational classification of intraocular lens power formulas. It's a very hodgepodge. It's a very disorderly kind of classification. And the gurus of intraocular lens power have published guest editorials a couple of years back in Journal of Cataract and Refractive Surgery. And in the context of today's discussion, they have given us a good perspective on intraocular lens, a proper thought process in this particular context. To quote Warren Hill, he says that in our journey from the previous millennium to the next millennium, new millennium, we have left behind the old baggage. We have adopted new technology, we have adopted new techniques, and why should we continue with the formulas which are from the previous generation, which are about 25, 30, 35 years old. So these are actually the newer formulas. We have been hearing about Barrett Universal 2, Hill RBF. We have been using these formulas for last so many years. Olsen, and the two formulas which have been making waves, and I mean last couple of years publication, you see a lot of publications and papers involving the performance of Kane and EVO formulas. So just to quote one study that I happened to go through, Giacomo Savini from Italy, January 2020, compared the formula accuracy of both the older as well as the newer formulas. where all the measurements were done using a swept source OCT-based optical biometer. And the yardstick was prediction accuracy error within a range of 0.5 diopter. And if you see here, the EVO formula, 90.67% of the patients were within this particular range. And again, this data were compiled into a stacked histogram, and that compared the percentage of cases with a given prediction error. The formulas were ranked according to the higher percentage of the prediction error within 0.5 diopter. And so this is the performance of the newer formulas. If you see here, the blue component of the vertical bar is a prediction error within number of percentage of eyes within a prediction error of 0.25% diopter, and the dark green is 0.5 diopter. So definitely the newer generation formulas have done better than the older formulas. And among the newer generation formulas, EVO has given us a astounding result, 90.67%. The same study also had RBA formula at the same level of accuracy. And definitely this is something that is really commendable. And when I looked into the genesis of EVA formula, I got to know that it is actually developed by somebody who is our neighbor, a neighboring country, Singapore. So a warm welcome to you, Dr. Chun Kwan Yeo, Dr. TK, and a bit more about him. He is currently the senior consultant ophthalmologist at Tan Tock Seng Hospital in Singapore, deputy head for the cataract, anti-segment and implant service, co-head for the IoT services, and lead clinician for AMK Surgical Center. His teaching appointments include senior clinical lecturership at Young Luz Lin School of Medicine with National University of Singapore, and content expert and clinical teacher for Lee Kong Chian School of Medicine, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. He has done a prestigious fellowship, anti-segment fellowship under Professor Graham Barrett in Perth in 2015. And he is the person who developed the EVO IOL formula. And today's webinar is basically based on his presentation on this formula, everything about this formula. He is also a member of a very prestigious intraocular lens power club, and his main interests lie in complex cataract and anti-segment surgery, biometry, and IOL formulas. So over to you for your talk on EVO formula, optimizing cataract outcomes, Dr. Chun Kwan Yeo, and then this will be followed by our panel discussion, which will be presented by Dr. Nirupama. So I stop sharing my slides now and then move over to Dr. TK. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Chakrabarti, for this kind introduction. It's an honor to speak to everyone here. I'm just going to give a talk on the EVO formula or the Evo formula. And can you see my slides here? Yeah, so I'm going to actually talk about the development and the outcomes and how to use the EVO formula. Here are my financial disclosures. I'm speaker for Alcon and Rayner and receive research funding from them. And I'm also consultant and speaker for Bausch and Lomb. So the EVO or Evo 2.0 formula actually stands for Ametropia Verifying Optical Formula. It was updated to version 2 in 2019. The original version was developed in 2016. It is actually a suite of formulas. It includes the EVO formula for non-toric lenses, the Evo Toric formula, the Evo for post-myotic refractive surgery eyes. It is called so because it is based on the theory of ametropization. It is a thick lens vergence formula, utilizes 5 parameters: axial length, K, ACD, lens thickness, central corneal thickness. It also allows posterior cornea measurements from the RMaster 700. I designed it for the A constant to be close to SRKT, so it's more familiar and usable, and it's freely available on this website here. So here I'm going to just talk about what is the basic thick lens formula. So this is the basic thick lens formula equation, where P equals to IOL power, N is the refractive index of aqueous or vitreous, L is axial length, and K is corneal power. D1 and D2 are the distances from the anterior corneal vertex to the first and second principal planes of the IOL. For the Evo, it is a thick lens formula, but this formula is greatly expanded within the formula itself. So for axial length, it is one of the most important variables in our power calculations, as we know. Our early optical biometry was unable to measure lens thickness, so it was difficult to determine the different refractive indices of different media of the eye. So our traditional or our current axial length is actually derived from a regression of the optical path length against immersion ultrasound, and that was done by Professor Hygis. For the Evo, it converts this traditional axial length to a sum of segment axial length based on the Cook's multiplied axial length with further adjustments to account for retinal thickness and as well to suit the model of the formula. So what this does is it allows variability of axial length as a function of lens thickness. And I believe, it approaches true axial length. And because it's able to utilize some of segment axial length, it can utilize the axial length from the argos biometer, which is the only biometer that uses a sum of segments axial length. So for the cornea power for the formula, it's derived using Gaussian thick lens equations. Of course, you have the anterior cornea power. For the posterior cornea power, it is either predicted or it can be measured. So we can input the IR master 700 values into it. And of course, you can use the corneal thickness. If you don't have central corneal thickness, the formula will derive for empirical central corneal thickness. And from here, you can derive the first and second principal plane of the cornea, which can be inputted into a thick lens formula. At the same time, the formula also deals with lens geometry, and it models and predicts different lens thickness for different IR powers and different lens geometry. So because the lens thickness and the shape of the IOL actually affects the principal planes of the IOL, I can see from the image here for biconvex, biconcave, positive meniscus or negative meniscus, the principal planes can be quite different. So the formula is actually designed to handle biconvex, biconcave, and meniscus IOL design, depending on the type of lens that we're choosing. So next is the important part, which is the effective lens position, or ELP. ELP is generally used for thin lens formulas. I prefer the term pseudophakic lens position rather than ELP because it is a thick lens formula. So the Evo formula predicts the pseudophakic lens position and then derives the principal planes of the IOL, which is D1 and D2, which I mentioned earlier. And it is based on the theory of emmetropization. What it does is it postulates that the cornea is the main driver of emmetropization after infancy as we grow. So for a given cornea power, there should be a fixed lens position and axial length to achieve emmetropia. But if a specific patient, the axial length differs from the emmetropic axial length, there should be a corresponding change in the lens position. That is the basis of the formula. It utilizes 5 parameters, and because of that, it allows the multi-dimensional capability in prediction. It utilizes multiple regressions and iterative techniques in its prediction. So the Evo is also a toric formula as well. It utilizes, of course, the anterior corneal astigmatism, but at the same time, it predicts for posterior corneal astigmatism, angle alpha, and as well as of course, the pseudophakic lens position. The angle alpha is important because if you look at this image here, the eye is actually looking straight, but there is always a physiological tilt in every eye. So the tilting of the lens actually induces astigmatism. So the formula predicts the amount of tilt in every eye. And in addition to posterior corneal astigmatism and the anterior corneal astigmatism, it derives total astigmatism of the eye. At the same time, it models different toric lens geometries based on the toric surface, whether the toric surface is on the anterior surface of the lens, posterior surface of the lens, or is it bitoric, because I feel that the principal planes would change depending on where the toric surface is. And finally, it allows input of measured posterior corneal astigmatism from the IR master 700. I have not updated this on the online calculator yet, but this will be coming soon. And finally, it also predicts for post-myopic refractive surgery eyes. So it can predict without clinical history. This is the calculator. If you just choose there is myopic refractive surgery, you can calculate without any other input. You will predict without clinical history. It can also predict with clinical history, and it can also predict with measured posterior cornea power or PK from the Armaster 700. So next, I'm going to talk about the outcomes. So this is a paper which Dr. Chakrabarti have shown earlier. This was a paper in JCRS in 2019, which compared 15 formulas, 150 eyes of the SN60WF. And this was actually the first version of the Evo, which showed the lowest mean absolute error and standard deviation, and followed by Hill RBF, Barrett, Olsen, Fico Optics, and Kane. And then there was a large study in ophthalmology in 2019 by Ron Mellers, Jack Kane, Thomas Olsen, and William Chang. This was like over 13,000 eyes of SN60WF. And they found that the Kane was the most accurate, followed by Olsen, Fico Optics, Barrett, and version 1 of the Evo. So if you look at Evo 2 outcomes, this is a paper by Cheng et al. In Journal Refractive Surgery in 2020, which looked at 410 eyes of the enVista lens, and they concluded that the most accurate predictions can be achieved with the Barrett, Evo 2, Kane, and Olsen formulas. This is a more recent paper in clinical ophthalmology in 2020 by Diego Hipólito Fernández. This was over 800 eyes of the SN60WF. You can see here they compared 13 formulas, including the newer formulas like Pearl DGS, NASA 2, and VRFG, and they found that the Kane, Evo 2, and VRFG were the most accurate, with no differences between them, and it was across all axial length, whether the eye was short, medium, or long. And so if you just specifically look at short eyes, this was a paper by Jack Kane in JCRS in 2020, which looked at very short eyes, eyes with axial hyperopia with high-powered lenses of 30 diopters or more. And this was 182 eyes of the SH6080, and found the Kane followed by Evo 2 was most accurate. And another paper by Carmona Gonzalez in EJO in 2020 compared 481 eyes, 3 types of IOLs, and Highgaze and Evo 2 was most accurate for their short eye series. And then most recently, Shirker in IOBS, which looked at short eyes, 129 eyes of the SN60WF, and then Evo 2 followed by Kane was most accurate, and Evo obtained the lowest mean absolute error and highest percentage of eyes within 0.5. And if we look at long eyes, Chang et al. Published in AJO in 2020, this was 164 of the enVista lens. The Evo 2 followed by the Barrett were most accurate, and with the Evo 2 having the lowest mean absolute error, median absolute error, and highest percentage of eyes within 0.5. And then another paper in AJO in 2021 by Mo looked at 106 eyes, 3 types of IOL, Kane followed by Evo 2 most accurate. And then the most recent was in the Journal of Refractive Surgery in 2021. This was 175 eyes. Then it showed that the Evo 2 followed by Kane was most accurate, with Evo having the lowest mean absolute error and highest percentage of eyes within 0.5. So if we look at toric outcomes, here is a paper which I presented in ASCRS in 2019, and we looked at comparison of different toric formulas. This was 117 eyes of the Acrisoft toric lens. Here you can see that Evo achieved about 80.34% within 0.5, very similar to the Barrett, which was 79.49%. And then this was followed by the Optical regression, the Johnson & Johnson online calculator, and the Holley 1 toric formula. And from here, the Barrett was statistically better than the Johnson & Johnson vision calculator and the Holley 1 calculator. And for the Evo, it was statistically better than the Optical regression, Johnson & Johnson vision calculator, and Holley 1 calculator. If we look at papers, Dr. Pantanelli published in 2020, this was 109 eyes of the enVista toric lens, looking at just eyes with low astigmatism. They compared it with the legacy enVista online calculator, which is a fixed ratio calculator. And they found that the Evo 2 toric formula outperformed the legacy calculator with regards to eyes with low astigmatism. And you can see here that the centroid error is lower compared to the enVista online calculator, whether it was against the rule, with the rule, or oblique. And then recently, Dr. Pantanelli published another paper with the same series of eyes and compared it with the Barrett toric calculator. And they found that there were similar outcomes within the Barrett and the Evo toric calculators, with the centroid around 0.18 to 0.2, similar mean absolute error and standard deviation. Here is the study which I performed for the Envista toric lens. This was 67 eyes for a single surgeon. All biometry performed with IR master 700, post-op refraction at 1 month, post-op K measurements with IR master 700, and post-op IOL axis measurements on the slit lamp. The corneal astigmatism, the mean value was about 2.42 diopters with a range from 0.48 to 4.72 diopters. And this utilizes the full range of the toric lens, and we compared different toric formulas, including the posterior corneal astigmatism predicting formulas such as Koch, Barrett, Evo, and Kane, as well as the non-posterior corneal astigmatism calculators such as Holiday 1 and the fixed ratio calculator. And here's the result. You can see that the Evo had about 55.2% within 0.5 and 79.1% within 0.75. This was similar to the Barrett and the Koch regression. And you can see that all three formulas had a central error very close to 0 and the lowest mean absolute error. The Kane toric formula had a slight central error of about 0.29, which was against the rule. And then the non-posterior corneal astigmatism calculators had higher central error of nearly 0.5. Both were against the rule. And if you look at the double angle plot, you can see that all three formulas, Evo, Barrett, and Koch, the centroid is like spot on in the middle. Here's the Kane, Holiday 1 and fixed ratio. You can see that there is a against the rule error of 0.29 for the Kane toric and nearly 0.5 for Holiday 1 and the fixed ratio calculator. And finally, for the post laser vision correction eyes, here's a paper which I published in 2020, which looked at the accuracy of different formulas using total keratometry in post-myopic laser refractive surgery patients. This was 64 eyes from 49 patients, which compared Evo using total keratometry, Barrett using total keratometry, and Haggis using total keratometry, comparing with the traditional post-myopic laser vision correction eyes, including Haggis L and Shamas PL. You can see that Evo achieved about 68.75% within 0.5, which is similar to the Barrett K with TK and Haggis with TK. And all three formulas were statistically better than Haggis L and Shamas PL. This is another study which I performed with Dr. Giacomo Savini. This was using the Pentacam, and this was 50 eyes with previous myopic laser vision correction. Data is from him, and all eyes measured using the Pentacam with 7 types of IOL. We used the ULIP constants or the APA-CRS constants for the Barrett formula, and we compared formulas using no clinical history, with clinical history, and with measured posterior corneal radius. Here is a busy table, but I'm going to simplify it. So here are the formulas that do not require clinical history. So Barrett K, no history, Evo, no history, Haggis L and Shamas PL. You can see that the Haggis L and Shamas PL has a myopic mean error of nearly 0.5. And then the Barrett K, no history, and Evo, no history is about mean absolute error about 0.5, which is lower than that of Haggis L and Shamas PL, and about 56 to 58% within 0.5. And if we look at the formulas with history, with clinical history, this is Barrett K with clinical history, Evo with clinical history, the Mascot formula, which utilizes clinical history, and the triple S formula from Dr. Giacomo Savini. And you can see that the mean absolute errors has dropped compared to no history, which is around 0.4 for all formulas. The Evo achieved about 0.385, and then the percentage of eyes within 0.5 was 64% to about 70%. And finally, if we use the posterior corneal radius measurements from the Pentacam for the Barrett K and the Evo, you can see that the mean absolute error is similar to that of using clinical history, with mean absolute error around 0.4 and percentage of eyes around within 0.5, about 70 to 72%. The Barrett K also allows both clinical history and posterior corneal radius measurements at the same time. You can see that with both values, the Barrett K, the mean absolute error drops further to 0.413 and about 70% within 0.5. So for the Pentacam posterior corneal measurements, I've not implemented it online yet, but it will be coming soon. So it shows that Evo 2 is able to predict for myopic laser vision correction eyes without clinical history, with clinical history, or with measured posterior corneal radius. The no clinical history method gives fair results. It is better with clinical history. The measured posterior corneal radius outcomes are equivalent to clinical history, So it is actually better to use measured posterior corneal radius measurements, especially if the accuracy of your clinical history is uncertain, especially when the patients come from another clinic or if they can't obtain their clinical history. So in summary, the Evo 2 formula exhibits high accuracy. It has no issues with axial length, whether it's average, short, or long. The toric predictions are similar to Koch, Barrett toric formulas, and it's able to predict for myopic laser refractive surgery eye. I'm going to show you how to use the Evo Online Calculator. So here is the input page for the Evo calculator. Here are the patient details. You need to input the patient name, or otherwise the formula will not allow you to calculate. This is a safety feature so that you don't confuse one patient's calculations with the other. Here is where you will input the parameters: axial length, K1, K2, ACD, lens thickness, and central corneal thickness. So lens thickness and CCT are optional. So we can just input axial length, K1, K2, and ACD, and that'll be fine. But I would recommend really putting the lens thickness if you have. That would improve your accuracy. It is not shown here, but if you only have axial length and K, the calculator will also allow you to calculate. The reason being there are certain eyes where the ACD is erroneous, such as patients with aphakia, subluxated cataract, or angle closure, whereby the ACD is not the physiological ACD. And over here, you can see that there's an argos biometer option. So generally, if you don't use the argos, you will select no. That would be the default. But if you're using an argos, you need to select yes. And here is where you input your A constant. And here is an important component of the formula or the calculator where you input the standard, where you input the IOL model actually. So the default is the standard model, but you do have other options. So if you are input using a Technis lens, the formula actually calculates slightly differently because I believe the Technis lens has different geometry compared to a standard lens. And of course, the AR40E lenses and MA60MA lenses, they change to a meniscus platform at certain powers. So you need to choose those if you're going to input these type of lenses. And finally, here is the post-LASIK or PRK option. So if it's a patient with laser vision correction, you need to just select yes. And for myopic laser vision correction, and if you, like what I said earlier, if you don't input the refractive history or the total keratometry values, you can calculate as so. But of course, if you have refractive history, you would input here, which would be the pre-LASIK spherical equivalent and the post-LASIK spherical equivalent. And also you can input the RMaster 700 total keratometry values. This is not the TK values. This would be the PK values, the posterior corneal power values, PK1 and PK2. You do not need to input the minus values, just input the values without the minus sign. Okay, so here will be the output of the calculator. It will give you 5 options of IR power and their predicted refractions. The difference is if you choose the Argos parameter, it will actually indicate the Argos parameter so that you know the calculation was based on the Argos parameter. Same thing for eyes with previous myopic laser vision correction. It will indicate here so that you realize you won't make an error or a mistake, because sometimes you may forget to click the option for myopic laser vision correction, and this is a safeguard to remind the surgeon that you need to click it if this doesn't appear. For the toric calculator, of course, it's a bit more, you need more input. You need the axis of K1 and K2. At the same time, you need to input your SIA and your incision axis. You require your centroid SIA. And then you still have your myopic laser vision correction options. So you just need to input them if this is the previous myopic laser vision correction eye. And most importantly is the toric model, all right? It gives you several options, whether the toric is the posterior surface toric, such as your Alcon, Hoya lenses. Majority of lenses are actually posterior surface toric lenses, so this is the default. The anterior surface toric lenses are like Rayner. And then, of course, the Zeiss is the bitoric. The Technis has a different model. And then you have your Envista lenses and the new Lux platform from Bausch & Lomb. So by choosing the appropriate model, it actually calculates differently. And at the same time, it also accounts for the different toric steps that inherent in a different company. So for a posterior toric, usually be a T nomenclature, whereas the bitoric would be a Zeiss nomenclature. So to show you an example, here is a posterior toric model. So, and you have your 5 spherical equivalent predictions and also the toric predictions. And you can see that it shows, here is the IOL alignment axis. You can choose whether you want to display in minus cylinder or plus cylinder. And here it shows you the recommendation, and you can see that it shows a T3. And it is important not just to rely on the recommendation, but also to look at the tables, because sometimes it may not be the lowest value that you want. So similar to the Barrett Toric calculator, you do need to look at the table. And here is a toric model where you choose a bitoric. So this will change to a Zeiss nomenclature. You can see the IR powers have changed. It comes in 0.25s and 0.75s. And then you have your toric steps in 0.5 steps. And that's how it counts for the Zeiss model. And finally, similarly, you would show post-myopic laser vision correction if you have chosen that option. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tun Kwan Yo, for your very elaborate and very nice presentation. So now we will move on to the panel discussion, and I would request Dr. Nirupama to initiate it, and then we'll discuss each and every point, get inputs from Dr. Tun Kwan, and then we move to the next question. So you have to stop sharing your slide, Dr. Tun Kwan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
Ramesh, you're muted.
Thanks, Arup. I've unmuted myself.
Good evening. Thank you for that explicit and very clear presentation on the EVO formula. We'll move on to the panel discussion. So the first question, which was given by Dr. Ramesh, is what inspired you to create the EVO formula? Did you see any deficiencies in the other commonly used formulae?
Okay. This is an interesting story. Actually, the Toric algorithm was developed first after while I was doing my fellowship with Professor Barrett, and then that algorithm could be applied to any formula. But I felt that it would be better to develop a spherical equivalent formula to fully utilize the Toric algorithm, and that was why the EVO formula was developed. And at the same time, there are a lot of formulas that segregated short eyes, long eyes. I wanted something that is more continuous. So I thought about whether the metropization theory could fit a formula. And that was why, and of course, our traditional formulas don't really do that well for short eyes and long eyes.
So are there any similarities between this and the Barrett Universal too?
Oh, I must admit, I was very influenced by Professor Barrett. It is a thick lens formula because I firmly believe in this idea of a thick lens formula, because that's most similar, and how we approach different lens geometries. That's very similar, but of course the prediction, how it predicts, is completely different. I don't know how he does this formula, but I think the thick lens formula is important because it allows expansion in capability. So for example, when we didn't have the PK values from our Master 700, when it came out, we could directly input it into a thick lens formula. Much easier compared to a thin lens formula.
So for our understanding, we would like to know whether it is only a Vergence formula, or does it incorporate some artificial intelligence and regression data as well?
It is a Vergence formula with multiple regressions in different components. And it is also an iterative formula. The AI part, there's no artificial intelligence in the prediction, but there is some techniques of artificial intelligence in how I prepare the data for the development of the formula.
So, TK, if I understand you correctly, initially you have a Virgin's formula, and then you see subsets of patients. We'll say a person with a series of patients with flat case. Then you see the outcomes of those flat case, and then you change your formula so that it bends the power prediction curve so that those flat case behave better. Is that the way it's done?
No, that would be the traditional way of doing it. So I didn't really like that because I don't like a hard stop whereby after certain axial length it changes, after certain shorter than this axial length is a different formula, longer than this axial length is a different formula. So the whole idea is to make it a single formula that is able to encompass almost every type of eye. Yeah. So there are the regressions not for like a cutoff for a short eye, long eye. No, it is a single regression, but there are different regressions for different parameters within the formula.
By saying that there are regressions for different parameters, I guess it has to be based on things like changes in the K, changes in the axial length, and changes in the
Exactly.
These are the three parameters that you can basically change, isn't it?
Exactly. So if you look at axial length, our traditional axial length is not the true axial length. So there are changes internally that we adjust the axial length to something that we believe is, or I believe is a more true axial length. Similarly for the case, they are not the true case. So I also adjust the case to fit. And with that, it actually can encompass a large range of eyes from short to long. Okay. And of course, the theory has to hold for it to encompass the full range.
Thanks, TK.
So I had a few questions for your Dr. Tun Kwan. So one good aspect of beneficial aspect of your formula is, it is also compatible with not only with with optical biometry, but it is also okay with ultrasonic biometry. Am I right? A-scan biometry?
It is, but you have to adjust the A constant. You can't use the optical A constant.
Yeah. So whatever is written on the packet, on the lens pouch, it is mentioned optical A constant for optical biometer and A constant for ultrasonic biometer. So that has to be followed. Now, when you talk about,
that should be fine. Yeah.
Now, when you talk about ultrasonic biometry, do you specify whether it is an immersion or it is contact? Because contact biometry is still done in a lot of places.
Yeah. So okay, on the manufacturer's labeling, a lot of them are actually contact, but they are moving. Some are immersion. It's very hard to tell which is which. So if you're going to use the manufacturers, usually it's assumed to be contact, but especially for the older formulas. But my preference is, of course, immersion ultrasound if you can. And I would still, if you are for a very dense cataract wave where you can't measure the axial length on the optical biometer, I would use the immersion ultrasound, but the case, I do not like auto case because it is not as precise as the IMaster case. So my suggestion is to use immersion ultrasound with IMaster case. You can still use the IMaster ACDs if it's measurable, and if it's not, the IMaster case better. So for that, it's easier to adjust the lens constant. So for example, if your optical lens constant is 119, you just need to minus 0.3 if you're using immersion plus an IMaster case.
Okay. So next question. Thank you very much for this response. Next question is, your formula is basically based on the argos, all right? And argos is a swept source OCT-based biometer, and that is its advantages, but it is not available in our country. So we basically use optical biometer from based on let's say IOL 700. Are these results interchangeable? Are these axial lengths from different optical biometers interchangeable? I mean, will
All right.
the formula be equally valid? Will be as accurate if we use an IOL Master 700 or some other optical biometry device?
Okay, so because IOL Master has been the gold standard, all the companies would, when they make a new biometer, would refer or try to reference to IOL Master, no matter what the technology. The only exception is the argos, which try to be different from IOL Master by using a sum of segment axial length. So majority of the companies, whether it's IOL Master, Lensa, Tomei, Nidec, their axial length would correspond to the IOL Master measurement. But the argos, because the sum of segments, it will not correspond. For the shorter eyes, we will measure shorter. For the longer eyes, for the shorter eyes, we will measure longer on the argos, and the longer eyes will measure shorter on the argos. Yeah, compared to the IOL Master.
Okay, thank you. Nirupama, any further questions on this?
We'll move on to the third question, which is, sir, do you take into account the refractive error of the operated eye after cataract surgery when you have to set the target refraction for the fellow eye cataract surgery?
Only if it's a very large error, like more than one diopter. Usually, otherwise, any error is within the limits of your prediction accuracy. So if you have a refractive surprise, then I would make sure that the measurements were accurate beforehand, before you apply a correction factor for the fellow eye, because a correction factor would not, from a measurement error, would not be correct. Whereas, so you need to make sure that your initial measurements for the first eye were all accurate by doing post-op measurements again. And then before you decide, actually, it may be an ERP error in an atypical eye before you do a correction factor for the fellow eye.
So what will be the correction factor? What percentage would you use? Correct.
So generally, for 0.3 will be sufficient. Yeah.
Okay, we're pretty much
for
the
the
same
Evo,
as Barrett. Yeah.
which is similar to the Barrett.
Okay. So the next question is by Dr. Chandrasekhar. Sir, would you like to put forward your question?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Nirupama. So, Dr. Tun Kwan, before we go to my question, I'll just elaborate on the previous question. That suppose we are putting a EDOF or a trifocal lens, and you are left with a say minus 0.25 or minus 0.5 in the first eye, then do you try to make the other eye hypermetropic, kind of a mono microvision?
So you're talking about EDOF lenses?
Yeah, any EDOF or trifocal.
Would I put make it more myopic in the other eye? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, so one eye is left with a slight myopia, very residual, which we consider acceptable. Let's say 0.25 minus or 0.5 minus. Then would you like to do the other eye slightly hypermetropic, say plus 0.25 plus 0.5? Will you?
I see. Yeah, so that would be like 100% kind of adjustment. So generally, I will do 100% adjustment. So such a low error is within the limits of accuracy of any formula. So if you do a hyperopic correction, direct one-to-one correction for the other eye, you may end up with a bigger surprise. So usually the correction factor is only about 0.3. Yeah, but within 0.25, 0.5, it is still within the limits of the formula. It's not really a refractive error. So I will not do that kind of adjustment.
So would you imply that when you set the target refraction for the fellow eye, second eye, we put it as a plus 0.25 or plus 0.5. That is the target refraction when you calculate the intraocular lens power, right?
Say again.
No, that would be the target refraction for the fellow eye. The 100% correction that you mentioned.
Yes, it will be like 0.25 or 0.5, which I would not do. Yeah.
Excellent. Now, typically in a normal eye, meaning we are talking about a virgin eye, do you use only one formula for prediction, or you use three formulae, like let's say Evo, Barrett, and Kane? And if the IOL powers are slightly different, that is, one is giving 20.5 and the other two are giving 20 with least residual estimate, spherical equivalent, then what will be your approach? Or you think that this is all very insignificant, we should not worry too much?
Okay. All right. So it depends on the type of eye. If you're looking at average eyes, I'm sure that EVO, Barrett, Kane will be the same. It won't be very different. For the long eyes, we are pretty similar. There won't be much difference depending on the type of IOL model that you're looking at. The main differences really comes in the very short eyes, less than 22 millimeters. So by knowing the biases or the trends of different formulas, you can make a decision. So generally, I will still compare Barrett, Kane, RBF, just to make a judgment. Usually, Kane and Evo is very similar. Barrett maybe have a slightly higher power. So that's how I make my decision.
Great, great. Now, instead of this fifth question, I think you already answered this question. So next question is that, are you working on hypermetropic LASIK, post-hypermetropic LASIK and post-RK?
Yeah, yes, but the thing is they are very rare, unless you guys have some eyes. So if there is a model that I've started, it just needs some validation. That's the main thing.
A related question is, you mentioned when you talked about extremes of eyes, the shorter eyes. So I mean, would you like to specify what exactly you consider as a short eye less than 19 millimeters?
Less than no. The errors really come in around 22 millimeters or less, and really a lot more when you go to 20 millimeters or less. So less than 20 millimeters is extremely short eyes, but the biases will start to come in around 22, and then the accuracy for all formulas will drop. So really there is no perfect formula for very short eyes, but we hopefully with more parameters we can get there. Yeah.
And another thing I've noticed, for extremes of eyes, I run all the formulas, particularly for myopic patients. I've noticed and then sometimes there may be even the Barrett hasn't given me the same result as the other three the traditional formulas. The traditional formula SRKT or high gaze has given me concordant readings, but Barrett has differed. So in that case, I have used the traditional formulas and I've found good results. So I think Chandrasekhar's point is, in extreme situations, it is always a good idea to run at least 3-4 formulas and see if they're giving the same result. If they don't, in that case, we need to think about what exactly is the right power. And whenever the traditional formulas are used, of course, that A constant optimization, axial length adjustments are done.
Yep.
Excellent.
So we'll move on to the next question, which was partly explained in the presentation. So the EVO formula, you said, incorporates the sum of segments axial length, but there are some biometers which do not give these sum of segments axial length. So how does the formula still work when we use the composite axial length?
Yes, so it simulates sum of segment axial length using the parameters such as length thickness. So it becomes like a simulated sum of segment axial length. That's the best way you can utilize traditional axial length. Yeah.
Okay, sir. And does the performance of the formula vary with the technique of optical biometry? Is it SSOCT based only, or can it be used with the other biometers?
No, it can be used with any biometer, really. Mainly because, which we mentioned before, all biometers reference their axial length to the IOL master. So even IOL master 700 reference their axial length to IOL master 500. So whether or IOL master version 5. So really, they try to make it consistent so that the formulas wouldn't give very different results. So whether it's IOL master 700 or IOL master 500, that'll be fine. Of course, the SSOCT gives a better acquisition, able to measure the denser cataract and longer eyes better, which the PCI or OCLR may not be able to measure. The Lensa OCLR the axial length is again reference to the eye master. The only thing is sometimes the lens star in very long eyes is unable to measure, partly because maybe of wavelength, partly maybe because that's the limited range where the mirror within the machine can extend to.
But the accuracy is definitely better with the SSOCT based biometers, right?
It should be, yes.
So the next question, Dr. Ramesh, you can put forward.
Sorry, I answered that. The reason is because the SSOCT, apart from axial length, you have your central corneal thickness and lens thickness, which are important factors in measurement in the formula. Yeah.
So the next question is there a theoretical limit to how accurate our post-op results can be? Because like you said, a large number of them do get 0.5 or 0.25 post-op. And I prefer them to be in the myopic side and not on the plus side. So is there any limit beyond which it's not worth pursuing?
There is a limit. This is due to several reasons. One of it is our refraction, because our refractions are in 0.25 steps. They are technician or optometry dependent. So the 0.25 steps limits your accuracy. So if you can drop the refraction steps to lower, then there's a ability for the formula to predict better, because all formulas utilizes post-op data to be developed. The other limit is, of course, your measurements. Our axial length measurements are very good with stress phospho CT now. The main thing is our corneal power measurements. They can still be a bit noisy, so it depends on the standard deviation of measurement for that specific machine. And also, the tear film is a factor when you're measuring corneal power as well. And finally, the other limit is the IOL design. There is a tolerance in how IOLs are designed, so there is an allowance. So even if an IOL is labeled 20 diopters, there is an allowance of more than 20 diopters or less than 20 diopters, especially in the higher powered lenses, which allowance is up to about 1 diopter. So that is the theoretical limit to accuracy as well.
So the next question is something which has troubled me a lot. All of us are following the formulas which have basically been optimized on the Caucasian eyes. But when I see patients, some of them have groups of unusual eyes, certain tribes, certain people I have with tight anterior segment and a large posterior segment. So is it okay to do different races need different formulas?
Well, this question was brought up by Ken Hoffer several years ago when he wanted to do a H5 formula. The thing is, the newer formulas, not just, of course, there are different anatomy differences in different races actually. So some eyes have deeper ACD, some have letter case. But the thing is, the question is whether can we measure them? But now we can actually measure them. So if these differences between different races can be measured, that's fine. Then we don't really need different formulas for different races, but if there are things that we can't measure, perhaps the ELP is different in different races, then perhaps. But the real problem is we are not purebred. It's not a world of purebred people anymore. So it's not, a lot of people are not pure Caucasians, pure Indians, pure Chinese. So it will be very hard to get a pure group of Caucasian eyes, pure group of Indian eyes, pure group of Chinese eyes, say this formula fits this. But if you look at all the publications currently, all formulas do well in the Caucasian population, in the Chinese population, in the Indian population. Same thing for Evo, which has been tested on European eyes, USA eyes, Singaporean eyes, Chinese eyes, Australian eyes. So, and I think there was a paper from India as well. So I don't think really there is, we are able to use arrays as a parameter to improve our formula. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So in this context, I mean, Ramesh posed a very important, interesting thing on the ethnicity of the patients. Now, the gender. I mean,
Yes.
now there's some discussion happening now, the gender, like, for example, the females tend to be overcorrected. So I think Barrett also talks about it, and the Pearl DGHS, Damian Gattinell's formula, I think, he has a separate formula for male and females. So what is your opinion on this and EVO?
Well, you revealed it because the next version will include gender. Gender is important, but mainly in very short eye. There is a difference in gender, which is not measurable on the biometers. It's a parameter that the difference is at a different level that we are not measuring. Yeah.
So right now, I mean, we just accept it, whether it's, that is, we just keep it as a thought, and we don't incorporate it in our IOL calculation formulas. Right?
If you really look at the normal eyes, long eyes, and the short eyes, it really comes to the very short eyes that the gender comes into play. And generally, the female eyes had a shallower or shallower ELP, and the male eyes have a deeper ELP. That's from data that I've seen.
So another question about your Toric calculator. See that SIA, it refers to the centroid value, or it refers to the surgical induced static magnetism, and what if
it has to be
value,
the centroid value?
Come
Sorry.
again?
So you mean an example of a centroid value? So it depends on
the SIA that is to be filled up in your formula, in EVO formula. So is that the centroid value? Which
it has to be a centroid value.
Yeah, it is not the SIA. It is basically a uniform centroid value for. And another thing is, we have a lot of different lenses available in our country, different manufacturers. And, I mean, if I have to use EVO formula for those lenses, what would be the A constant criteria for those lenses? Many of the, I think 80 is the big chunk of Indian, the lens usage is Indian make. Those are different. They have, I mean, I don't think you have taken that into account, like what I saw when you presented. So if I have to use an Indian lens and your formula, then how do I go about it?
Well, the best option is to use the standard option, which is what any formula would do. They only have one option, whereas I'm giving you different options. So the standard option will fit almost all lenses, unless the design of the lens is drastically different from the standard lenses.
Okay, so put it in the standard category. Okay. Yeah. So anything else?
Yeah, the next question.
Two things, Arup. The next version of the Hill RBF will have a male and a female version. They'll ask you for the gender. During his AI research, he found out that they both are giving slightly different.
Version 4.
Yeah, but
okay.
So in the version 4. Okay. And the second thing is that as far as the lenses are concerned, many of the Indian lenses resemble standard an Alcon platform, or they resemble one particular platform. So I generally choose that, whether it's a biconvex or whether it's a.
If it's a hydrophilic acrylic lens, Rayner design.
Yes.
The design the material is not affected because it can be corrected design, by the lens constant. It's mainly the shape of the lens. So if you're biconvex, you choose the standard option.
Yeah.
So the next question, we would like to know whether the optimization of the A constant helps in improving the results with the EVO formula.
Yes, because every practice, the refraction lane is slightly different. The surgeon operates slightly differently. So optimization and the measurements may be slightly different. So optimization always offsets the systemic error. So you should always optimize your constant.
And also we want to know by what percentage the lens thickness and CCT can improve the prediction accuracy results of the formula, because you had mentioned it's an optional variable.
Yeah, so the lens thickness really comes into play when we are approaching short and long eyes, or eyes with atypical lens thickness in average eye. And if I looked at about 8 over 100 eyes from the United States, with and without lens thickness, the difference is about maybe 4% within 0.5. And so that's the improvement you get with lens thickness. Central corneal thickness is a very minor improvement. So if you don't have central corneal thickness, it's not a big factor, but lens thickness is a big factor.
And you had also mentioned that the lens design also matters. So which IOL platform has given the best results with the EVO formula?
Okay, so I've shown several papers which you can see that there are different lenses, from the Alcon lenses to the Technis lenses and Vista lenses. So that's why I feel that most lenses will fit the standard option. And the Zeiss lenses as well. So there's no best platform. So because the formula is not based on just one IOL model. Yeah.
And we will move on to the next question. Dr. Ramesh, you would like to?
Yes, with the EDOF lenses, you have a small central increase in power. So how exactly do you optimize these lenses?
You mean for how is the apparatural power taken and how do I optimize? Okay, so if you need to optimize it when you do your post-op refraction, they need to be the maximum plus or least minus, so that when you do your refraction, so that you don't give an erroneous myopic type of refraction, so that your A constant can be the right one. And then if you're looking at how the power is taken, because all lenses have a base curve or anterior radius, posterior radius, and that's how it's, if you're talking about the refractive EDOF, so not the diffractive one. So some of them have a central bump. If you're talking about like the IHAN, which is more like a monofocal plus, they still have a base curve. It's just that the central elevation is higher. So the power is based on that base curve rather than that elevation at the central zone. Yeah.
So we can just take the Technis Zazibu constants and then go on from there.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a difference between the ICB or IHAN's constants and the ZCB constants, so long the refraction is done correctly. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
And sir, lastly, we would like to know whether the EVO formula can be modified to use for phakic IOL power calculation.
Okay, so it doesn't really require any modification, because first of all, if you have the IR Master 700, so for phakic IOL power calculation, there are two issues. One is the actual length, whether it's correct or not with a lens in the eye. And then the second one is whether the ACD is measured correctly or not. So for the actual length, there is an inherent option in the IR Master 700 to choose a phakic IOL actual length mode, so that you will take the thickness of the lens into account. And then because if you have extra lens inside the eye may be erroneously shorter. So there is a correction factor in the IR Master 700. But generally, the phakic lenses are very thin, so the thickness of these lenses don't really affect the axial length that much. So the other factor is, of course, the ACD. So if the machine detects the phakic IOL as the actual physiological lens, then of course, then your ACD will be erroneous. So you do have to look at the image of where the cutoffs are for the ACD measurements. And in these cases, if you can't adjust it to where the physiological lens is, then that's why there's an option to not input the ACD in the formula, because that ACD will not be the right ACD.
When you started your talk, you said that EVO is based on the theory of emmetropization. So can you just elaborate on that? What exactly is that theory?
Yeah, so if you look at kids, when we are born, and from infancy to about childhood, then from there on, our K values don't really change that much. It is our actual length that changes. So the theory is that the corneal power is driving the emmetropization of an eye. So the corneal power becomes a reference in the formula, whereby So if you have a specific cornea power, you should have this axial length and lens position to achieve ametropia. But of course, not all eyes achieve ametropia. So if this patient has this cornea power and his axial length differs from the ametropic axial length, then the lens position would correspondingly have to change. That's how it works. That's the theory behind it, and then it's modeled into a mathematical equation. Yeah.
What about the other formulas? They also take into account this phenomena, or they're ignored?
I'm not sure there is. No.
Okay. So I think, we had a great time. Chandrasekhar and Ramesh, any further things to be asked, clarified, or?
No, there are so many more questions which is coming up that I think we have to mull over it. We have to digest what he says, and then we have to move on. So I think all of us will start using the TK formula more in future.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to have this discussion because, most of this current last 2-3 years literature, papers that are published, they compare EVO, and since, Tuan Kuan is just a couple of hours from our country.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also it is very curious that in Southeast Asia, both Kane and the Evo formula and Barrett's, some of the best formulas have come from the same region.
Yes.
Why is that?
Because we have too much free time.
That I can't believe. TK.
No,
I know
just
you're very
kidding.
busy.
So
thank you very much for inviting me to talk about the formula, and hope everyone will get good results with it, and hopefully everyone can try it.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much, Tun Kuan Yew, for staying up late, and Ramesh and Chandrasekhar and Nirupama for having a very vibrant, very active discussion session. I'd also like to thank Sai and Manjula for facilitating this webinar. They handle all the emails and the platforms, Zoom platforms, and Microlabs for again helping out with all this logistics. So I hope all of us had a very very good learning experience, and we'll use the EVO formula more often in our practice, and then we will see how we go to the next step. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Very much.
Namaste, TK.
Thank you.
Bye.
We can go offline now. Stop recording. Right?
Yes, sir.
Right?
Yes, doctor. We can.
Can you have you stopped recording?